Good morning Apex University, I'm Coach Nihil, but you can call me Dan, and before we jump into today's gameplay, I just wanted to start with this intro clip to show you a fun new way to drop while we're waiting for Season 2. With the new flyers you can see which area they're in when you land. Landing near them you can grab the closest weapons and go for the kill to get some quick loot and be less susceptible to RNG, plus just giving you something more fun and interesting to do on your drop while we're waiting for new content to come out. You can see in just a 30-second clip I get geared up a lot faster than I would by looting the buildings, and it's just something interesting to do. So earlier this week we looked at the gameplay of somebody I've played with quite a lot by the name of Fall. He's an experienced FPS player, and so we judged him quite harshly, expecting him to play very well and nitpicking details like which weapons he's using and when he decides to engage. As you guys might know, my personal Discord is linked in the description, where there's a lot of people to play with in case you're looking for teammates that are willing to use a mic and cooperate. One of those people is Jay. He ended up playing with us recently and I quite like him as a teammate. He's communicative, he stays calm, and he's very polite. So when looking at his gameplay I was thinking of what to criticize and what to point out that I would like him to improve, but what actually struck me about this gameplay is that I would classify his mechanics within this game as overwhelmingly average. They're not great, but they're not bad either. He hits a lot of his shots, and there are moments where he completely lasers and owns the opponents, just as there are moments where he misses a bunch of shots that better players would have hit. But the point that stood out to me is that he still does very well this game, and so rather than criticizing the things that he could have done better, although we'll point out some things here and there, I wanted to show you the good habits Jay has built to still do well, even though he might face enemies that have better aim, movement or awareness. So the 4 habits that we're going to be focusing on during this gameplay is, first of all, staying on the outside of every fight. As you guys might know from all of my videos, getting sandwiched is one of the worst things you can do in the BR. Because of that, you always want to know how many teams there are around you and where from, and try to make sure that when there's multiple teams involved in a fight, you stay on the outside of it so that you don't have to fight 2 teams from 2 different angles coming in on you. The second rule is always using cover. When you're caught out in the open without cover, it becomes a straight aim duel with any advantages that the opponent might have when they do have cover, or because they get their shot on you first, as well as if you don't have the highest quality armor, they might have more total health than you, and so you need to significantly out-aim them or out-move them to win the fight. If you make sure you're always near cover, you can compensate for the fact that your aim might be worse than the opponent because they can't catch you off guard as easily. And even if they get the first shot on you, you can first get to cover where you can heal, and hopefully your teammates can make it over to you and reset the fight that way so that you still have a chance to win it. Now this might sound fairly obvious, but if you pay attention to it, you'll notice that most people, when they are not already in a fight, aren't actually paying attention to this. And one of the things we're going to be noticing Jay's gameplay here is that he always stays near cover, and when he's scouting the surrounding area or setting up to loot in a new area, he uses a powerful position to do so, which is why he doesn't get caught off guard as easily. The third rule is wait for your teammates. One of the problems with not having a ranked mode in Apex yet is that there's a very big discrepancy between the skill levels of the people that you're going to run into. That's not just enemies, but also your teammates. Because of that, you're inevitably, if you solo queue, going to run into teammates that are far slower than you, just like these teammates right here. Now, while they may not be good and it doesn't look like they'll make the difference in a fight, not being alone and therefore not being pushed as easily or having your teammates that distract enemies is extremely valuable if your aim isn't godlike, because you need that little bit of extra time to get that reload off or hit those extra bullets and win your fight anyway. We see Jay spending a lot of time in this game being ahead of his teammates and then waiting before traversing through a new area where he isn't aware of the teams to make sure his teammates are nearby and he's in a safer position. Even if they go down early into the fight, this gives him the time he needs to clutch it out and play well. Lastly, something Jay does extremely well in this video is the rule of never being idle. If you make it until the last team fight, the average game of Apex is about 15 minutes. In those 15 minutes you've got time to loot up to the gear you need that you win the game, to make it to the last circle, to survive any teams you might run into, and be the last team standing. That's what a BR is. So it's quite important to make sure that you use any downtime in between fights effectively to make sure you get the most value out of them, mainly so that once you do get into a fight you've already done the other things that you need to do, like looting, scouting and positioning, and you don't have to worry about them anymore, because 9 out of 10 times once a fight starts you will no longer have the time to set those things up. So we saw that your game started in artillery, and after making your way out towards the watchtower, you heard that there were opponents nearby. We got the first glimpse of your good habits here while you let your teammates know not only that there are enemies nearby, but you waited in a safe position where you weren't in between the enemies but rather on the outside of their position so that you could not get sandwiched while your teammates were catching up to you. Now during the time that you were playing safe and waiting for your team, the enemy team somehow decided that they were going to disengage and they didn't want to fight. So you didn't get to engage on them here and you chased them into cascades where you lose track of them. And here we can see the second good habit really coming into its own. If we look at the difference between you and your teammates right now, it's that your teammates aren't really aware of anything around them. There's one enemy that they saw running into a building and they chase that person across the bridge, but as soon as that person is dead, they're just looting and they're not really looking around themselves where the last enemies might be. At the same time, we see you using the cover of the building, looking through the window, using the balcony and high ground, and when you're unsure, making sure that you're in a defendable position where you can't easily be shot by somebody that you're not expecting. Because of that, your teammates are in a position where they might be caught off guard, but you're there to compensate for it, and so right now you can see the value of playing around teammates even if they aren't the best, and with good habits yourself you can still create plenty of safe scenarios even though your teammates are not playing safe at all. You guys end up spotting the enemies that got away in a house across the river, and instead of just straight up pushing it, you wait for your teammates, you use the effective range of your sniper, and you try to get some early damage in. If your aim isn't the best, getting some early damage in from a safe range like this, where you can still drop down and heal if they out-aim you, is a very good play. Now if we look at the minimap here, you guys aren't in a circle and the enemy team is even farther away from it. So at this point, you could choose to gatekeep this team and hold either the location you're at now or the next zone against them. Sadly, your teammates decide to push in anyway, which is not the best play, but because they are doing that and you want to stay close to your teammates, I would suggest you go and help them out, which you do end up doing. Always keep in mind that 3 players following a bad plan is far more powerful than 3 players following 3 separate good plans. That is not to say you should follow your teammates into suicidal pushes, but you should try to back them up whenever possible. Keep in mind that if your teammate doesn't have the best position, but you have a powerful position with good cover behind or above them, that still makes them quite difficult to push and makes it very easy for you to punish opponents that aggressively push on your teammates. This is fundamental to doing well when you're not a very experienced player, because better players are going to push on you aggressively, and having a strong defendable position is how you punish them for doing that. That's also where it's extremely important that you and your teammates are somewhat close together and don't let the enemy team surround you in any way. Stay on the outside of the team fight. After getting some early hits in, you force the enemy team into the building and your teammate goes down. In this fight we can see that even while your teammate goes down, you maintain the good habit of using cover when you reload or heal. Even for a fast reload like the R99, you quickly drop down and make sure you can't get hit, and this is really the value of making these things habits. They need to become your intuition, they need to become instant, and that's why you're playing very well right here. As you approach the building, the same thing as we saw in Fall's video 2 days ago, after reloading your teammate is down, you force the enemies into the building and you want to approach. Approaching this building means you have to traverse the river out in the open. This makes you very susceptible to taking a lot of damage, and as you get close to the house, it is very difficult to maintain cover if they decide to exit and push you. What we see you do is throw grenades through the 2 windows where they might peek, which effectively blocks their sightlines on you and buys you about 5 seconds to traverse the river. Just like in Fall's game 2 days ago, this is a very good play and allows you to cross the distance without being punished for it. This is of course the flip side on what we mentioned earlier of holding a defendable position while somebody tries to aggressively push you. You are using your grenades to prevent them from using that position to punish you for pushing up to the building, and as you get up to the building, rather than running in without having any information, we see you properly scout through the windows where you can easily sidestep to the left or right for good cover. Once again, you're not being idle, you are doing something, you are traversing, you are relocating, and you are scouting, even though you're not directly fighting. When you first look through the left window, you don't spot an enemy, and rather than running in on that side while still not being sure where they are, you maintain the outside position where you have better cover to figure out where these enemies are located. Your patience here is exactly why you end up on top in this fight, because if you had rushed in thinking that that room was safe, they could have all pushed you from the other room or held it against you and punished you for pushing in aggressively. As you go up to the second window, you catch the lifeline standing still, and you're able to down her quite easily because she's not strafing. This also really shows the value of your patience and making sure you keep putting yourself in good positions. If you keep putting yourself in good positions often enough, it's just a matter of time before you get lucky and the enemy does something that you can punish. So building these good habits give you way more opportunities to make plays, meaning that if you don't have the aim or other mechanics to finish a play, you can build more opportunities for yourself until it ends up working out. Whenever you kill an opponent, imagine it like one of those stealth games where your last known position becomes visible through a wall, kind of like Bloodhound's tactical ability. Between the gunshots, the kill feed, the banner of the downed enemy showing up for their teammates, as well as them possibly pinging or using the microphone to give away your location, you'll always want to assume that as soon as you fire at or down an opponent, the enemies will know where you are. Because of that, we see Jay wasting no time being idle and instantly swapping his position to another defendable position where he has cover and is able to scout for the last opponent. This is a great play, and if he hesitated here, he would have probably been punished. Because of the relocation, the enemy loses track of him and eventually thinks it is safe and decides to go for a res. Your ability to stay alive until the enemy messes up here is why you get such incredible value here. You were able to stay alive until the lifeline stopped strafing and didn't notice you shooting her through the window, which got you a free kill thanks to your patience and your good approach on the building. Then, your quick thinking when changing up the position after killing the lifeline and having the patience to scout out for the next opponent lends you a free kill on them as they're rezzing. After you win the fight, you make portals for your teammates to quickly get back from the respawn beacon to their death boxes, and there should be plenty of loot here now for them to out-heal this zone, as in regular queue it doesn't do a lot of damage yet. Now, you are probably safe in this situation because you are deep into zone, but just in case, keep in mind that this fight started with longbow spam at long range in the middle of the cascades before the zone encompassed this area, so if there were any teams nearby, they might still be coming to third party you, as it is very easy to tank this first zone. It probably won't happen and there's no indication that you aren't safe, but it's just something to keep in mind after every fight, that your gunshots may have attracted opponents. After rezzing your teammates, you guys make your way through cascades and you instantly want to go for the balloon. Try to memorize the locations of the redeploy balloons, as they're a great way to get out of zone or towards new locations quickly and way more safely than simply running around. You use it to fly towards the top of the mountain on your left, and this is a pretty hot area. If you've played the game a lot, you will start recognizing areas that quite often have fights and where fights tend to drag out and end up involving multiple teams. This is one of those areas, as you're right in the rotation between a bunch of named locations towards the middle of the map and in between two res beacons. Because of that, as you land here, I would have full healed on the edge of zone behind some cover before moving further forward, just because it is a location where you are quite likely to run into enemies. Once again, we can see your good habit shining through as you properly wait for your teammates and warn them that you heard a team nearby, so that you guys aren't caught off guard as easily. We can also see the good habit of never being idle, because after you healed up, while you're still staying in the area and trying to remain unseen, not going for this fight and not playing too aggressively, you do spend your time looting around and scouting for any possible information, which, if you do indeed spot a team or a fight during this downtime, is going to make the difference between living or dying in an upcoming fight. The next zone pushes you and your team towards bridges. So far you guys have stayed near the outside of the zone, which is far safer than the inside and makes it less likely for you to end up in between rotating teams, which is why you're able to get into such good positions. But I once again want to point out how these habits are making this game far safer for Jay and giving him the time he needs to make good plays, because as he moves over towards bridges, where he has no information about enemy teams or loot, the first thing he does is move towards a safe high ground position where his back is covered, where the places he's already scouted are behind him because he knows there are no enemies there, and he can look around and use his scope to figure out if there are enemies, if the place has been looted, and where he wants to go next, as well as, of course, waiting for your teammates to catch up. Even though these moments might only take 10 to 30 seconds every time you show up in a new location, and 9 out of 10 times you don't actually end up spotting somebody, as people are either not there or inside of buildings, it's about that 1 out of 10 times that you do spot somebody. Those are the moments where it's going to make the difference between living and dying. With you and your teammates finally reunited, one quick thing to point out is that this enemy team on the right side top will know that a new team has shown up because you aimed at a wraith. That's just something to keep in mind if you intend to use the element of surprise to punish teams. If you've aimed at a wraith, they should get a warning from her passive that they've been aimed at. Once you've got a warning from an enemy team already, that team will not trigger a warning again. So once the warning gets re-triggered, you will always know that a new team has aimed at you. You see your teammate pushing out a bit more aggressively in front of you. He is a bit too early to punish the enemy team, and so he ends up getting pushed back. Even when he takes a lot of damage or even gets downed, we see you not panicking, you maintain cover, and because of that you are able to outpressure the opponent and get them to leave your teammate alone rather than thirst him. Staying calm and maintaining these good habits are really paying off. Then, as the teammate drops down and break line of sight, we see you maintain a little bit of high ground and cover by moving towards your left, and once again we see you use cover when you reload. Then you end the fight with a nice little box play while your teammate gets revived, and we can see right here you are in a safe location to loot and to revive because you were on the outside of this fight. Had another team been on your other side, you wouldn't have been able to get away with it and your teammate would have been dead meat. As well as, if you end up getting pushed because of the noise from this fight, you now have a safe path to retreat to exactly where you came from, because you already scouted and cleared it and you already know where the defendable position is because you were holding it earlier. You end up using this position to take more shots at the enemy team before you move, and we can see right here that this enemy team that you are shooting at is under a lot of pressure to use cover or to move because they are stuck between the enemy team and you, so no matter where they go they can get poked at. At the same time, you are under very little pressure, even though this enemy's accuracy up until this point has looked better than yours. You are under far less pressure because nobody is in an easy position to push you or punish you for any damage that you might take. When your teammates decide to push up closer using the zipline on the left, you follow them, maintaining the good habit of sticking near your teammates, and your teammates have chosen a good location to stay on the outside of the fight in a defendable position. You've got high ground on top of the house where you can get with the zipline or climb on top of, as well as great cover on the inside of the house with windows that you can shoot towards the outside. This great cover and position is why we see that you are able to heal at your own leisure and you are under no pressure at all to relocate before you're able to heal. After healing up, we see the first time that you are breaking your own good habits by first of all pushing the enemies alone, and second of all ignoring the fact that there is potentially a team on your right, so you might be putting yourself in the middle of a team fight right now rather than the outside. Because of that, we know that the rest of this fight is significantly more risky than the start of it, and we're going to instantly see you being under a lot more pressure to perform and to out-aim and out-move the opponents as you're pushing up here, because you've broken your own rules. Although this is a risky flank that I wouldn't have advised, something that you do quite right is your timing. You're climbing onto the building, which is something that you can very easily be punished for if they hear you climb up and shoot you while you're in your climbing animation. However, the moment that you are actually climbing on top of the building is the moment that the enemies are shooting at your team. Because of those gunshots, it is way less likely that they will hear you climb up, which hopefully means you can catch them off guard. And as far as this one team goes, you're still on the outside of their position, which hopefully means you can relocate if things go wrong. But I should point out, you are pushing them on a high ground, with most of the surrounding area being fairly open the moment you jump off, unless you're willing to go inside of the building. So if this ends up going poorly, for instance, all three enemies turning around and shooting back at you, you might not be able to run away safely unless you use your abilities. Therefore, it is important not to use your void walk unless you're using it to disengage. If something forces you to use it, you should disengage even if you have more health left than the opponent, because it means that you won't have your safe way out anymore if things go wrong. When you climb on top of a building like this, you should always instantly ADS to be ready to respond as quickly as possible to an enemy that is already aiming at you to minimize the reaction time advantage that they have. You don't do that here, because of that you don't notice the Pathfinder and you end up shooting the enemy that dropped off instead. Had you shot this Pathfinder while he was crouched and healing, you would have probably killed him in one magazine like the lifeline before, so there's definitely something to improve. We once again see you using cover for the reload, so that is very good, and mainly hip firing at close range. You down the opponent and now have a fairly decent high ground that you've taken from these enemies. Sadly, because you moved away from the outside of the fight towards the middle, you now have no clue from which direction you are most likely to be attacked, and so when somebody climbs on top of the building, you aren't ready for it and you're forced to drop back down. You are potentially losing the skill and the value you got because you put yourself in a risky spot where you didn't have time to follow up. Think back on the previous fight where you killed the lifeline that downed your teammate. You had time to loot and to relocate as much as you wanted because you were on the outside of the fight. You've now lost the luxury of time. After you climb back on top of the building, luckily the Wraith is already shooting and distracted and you laser quickly right there. So far very good. You are still at an inherent disadvantage by pushing aggressively alone into multiple opponents, so when this Octane attacks you, I am very sad to see that you almost made the correct movement play to counter him here. You should have jumped because the roof is slanted into a slide towards him. You would go farther than he expected and it's very difficult for him to make that turn and keep hitting you, whilst you can then quite easily hipfire at him with the R99. Although you don't do that, we see you do the next best thing, which is once you take too much damage and the situation becomes a bit risky, you use your Void Walk to mitigate any damage and get out safely. Sadly, as we mentioned before, from this position it is very difficult to get away from the enemy alive unless you have backup from your team, which you lost because you left them, and we see you getting punished for it, because this enemy has the freedom to chase you as much as he wants until your teammates or another team shows up to pressure him out. So here you can see that you might be good enough to kill 2 opponents by yourself, but it is still the wrong play to go in and do so if there's no way for you or your team to follow up on it. And if your teammates are very passive like these teammates are, it's the wrong play to go in for a 1v2 and then go down, because they'll probably not follow up on it. Luckily, although it is a risky play, your teammates don't leave you hanging. They show up towards the end of the fight and finish it up for you. Get the res off, this is very nice. When you're using a Phoenix here, I would have dropped down or taken some kind of cover, because it is easy for an enemy that hears you to drop on you here and just quickly finish you with a single shot. As well as there being an enemy team inside of this building that you weren't aware of that could have killed you quite easily right here had they actually been paying attention. Now you are once again in a position where you are close to your teammates and you are not surrounded, so as you open the door and run into an enemy team here, that is quite a butt-clenching moment that might be scary for most of us, but not to worry, you can climb up towards the safety of your team and you're all good. We rotate around the building, still properly using cover and being unpredictable by not constantly peeking the same doorway, so far you're back to your good habits and that's very nice. Once you see a grenade that you can't avoid, you should generally use your Void Walk instantly, and even though you might not take any damage from it, you should once again instantly relocate to the high ground and the safety of your team, because you'll be more vulnerable while your Void Walk is on cooldown, so resetting just about enough to make sure you end up behind your teammates while your cooldown is ticking off is a safer way to approach the fight. And just like all of the other good habits, means that you create more opportunities for yourself to do well and fewer opportunities for the opponent to punish you. It's a shame you fell down, but we do see all of your good habits paying off. Luckily, the one time that you broke them, your team clutched up and saved you, and just like that, without godlike aim, you had a nice 8-kill win right there. I hope this was helpful. Peace.